Now, please welcome Politico's Chief Operating Officer, Kim Kingsley.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming in from the rain. On behalf of Politico's publisher, Robert Albritton, our CEO, Fred Ryan, and our partners at Google and the Tory Burch Foundation, I am pleased to welcome you to our third event in the Women Rule series. This is an amazing moment in our lifetime. Women are indeed beginning to rule. Last month, we launched the series spotlighting amazing women who have innovated a movement. If you haven't already looked at our phenomenal essays on Politico, I'd urge you to go and read about Greta Van Susteren's friendship with Roberta McCain and Ruth Bader Ginsburg's take on Sandra Day O'Connor. Next week, we'll bring you award-winning author Terry McMillan's words on Michelle Obama. Today, we are very excited to continue exploring the many ways women are impacting change by showing how women are economically empowering themselves and empowering other women as well. We also want to share the realities of where women are on the playing field, but offer solutions, not complaints. We are fortunate to have panelists with us today who are renowned doers. They have dedicated their careers to finding solutions for women and have generously shared their successes with other women too. And this is an incredible audience here today. Among you, we have a member of Congress, the first female White House press secretary, the founders of a cupcake dynasty, yum, diversity leaders, digital entrepreneurs, corporate executives, and more. Politico, Google, and the Tory Burch Foundation were built by entrepreneurs. And it's our hope that you will leave today's event feeling empowered to think big, become an entrepreneur, support an entrepreneur, or at the very least, value the entrepreneurial spirit. We also want to draw attention to the importance of women helping women, a real hallmark of our panelists here today. We hope everyone has an opportunity to ask questions and share experiences through our roundtable discussions in a bit. And if the spirit moves you, take a moment during today's discussions to write your name and a question you'd like to ask our panelists on the cards we gave you earlier. We'll have our Women Rule team circulate throughout the event to collect your questions. You can also ask questions via Twitter at #WomenRule. And I'd like to, again, thank Google and the Tory Burch Foundation for their energy and support on this series. We're so delighted to be working with them. And now, without further delay, I'd like to welcome Politico's Mike Allen and our panel to the stage.
Thank you, KK. Appreciate it. Thank you very much, Kim Kingsley, who does such a great job of running and growing our company and always has solutions and not complaints. I'm Mike Allen, your designated dude today, and quite honored to have a great panel with us, which is going to come out right now. We have Dina Powell, who's with us, and Natalia Oberti Noguera, and Julie Katzman, and Karen Mills right here. Go ahead and have a seat. Those of you who are out in live stream land, we wanted to welcome you, and we'll be taking your questions, as Kim mentioned, at #WomenRule. I have a Twitter machine here, which will give me your questions, and I'll get the chance to answer them. Very appreciative to Google, which has a great Washington office run by Susan Molinari, who I still call Congresswoman out of habit, and the Tory Burch Foundation. We're very grateful to them for making Women Rule possible. It's one of the most important things Politico is doing this year, so very excited to be here. Real quick to tell you about our amazing panelist, Julie Katzman, who's a New Yorker, who's become a Washingtonian, is Executive Vice President and COO of the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank. Natalia Oberti Noguera, who gave me a little coaching earlier and says I'm doing...
flying colors.
Okay, thank you. Is the founder and CEO of the Pipeline Fellowship. And Natalia knows, you guys know that Politico Playbook is big on birthdays. Well, today is a special day that Natalia pointed out to me.
It's the International Day of Girl. And who run the world? Girls. Good.
So as she was saying backstage, not just women rule, but girls rule as well. Dina Habib Powell from the Goldman Sachs Foundation. She's the Global Head of Engagement for Goldman Sachs. A lot of you still know her as Madam Secretary from when she was in the State Department of the Bush administration, and she runs Goldman's fantastic programs, 10,000 Women, which is a 5-year initiative to offer business and management education to women entrepreneurs around the world, and 10,000 small businesses. How many women is 10,000 Women up to now?
I'm so proud you asked, because this month we actually have reached our 10,000th woman. So we're extremely proud.
So it's now the 2001 Women program. And Karen Mills, who I still call Administrator Mills, escaped August 31st from the President's cabinet. She was the administrator of the Small Business Administration. She was a venture capitalist before that, and now is up at Harvard. Currently, she's at the Institute of IOP, Institute of Politics, right? I was trying to add something else to that.
Is that word
I knew it was the
you're
IOP,
looking for.
the Institute of Politics, and then after that, she'll be with the Harvard Business School. Beth Furking, fun to see you down here in the front row. So we're going to start off with a jump ball question that anybody can answer. If more women were in leadership in Washington, would the government be shut down? Karen, go.
Well, I have to say that I'm here today for lots of reasons, but one is I love the title Women Rule, because women in power really does lead to, we think, more effective outcomes. And it is not just because we think that women can get together and find common ground and collaborate. I think it's also because women in power tend to look and ask the following question: what is the outcome we're trying to achieve? And when you know the outcome you're trying to achieve, then you can be tough, you can say no, you can lead, but you know that there's an objective out there that you want to get to, and that is what moves the world forward and sometimes prevents log jams.
And what we're seeing is
So
that...
excuse me just a second. So I'm just going to translate the answer to that is no. The government would not be shut down, right? Natalia?
Well, I was going to say, it's a moot point, and what we are seeing actually is that it's the women in Congress who are leading the end of the shutdown, with U.S. Senator Collins and other women who are coming
Senator
together.
Patty Murray is going to be doing the budget negotiating, right?
And that's what we're seeing, that when there are women, and if there were more women, even if that they're actually being part of the solution, which is what's important.
And Dina Powell, what have you told young women that you've mentored and advised who are going into leadership positions in Washington? What do you tell them about navigating this crazy city?
I see one young woman I had the privilege of working with, and that's Genevieve Ryan, who worked with us in the Goldman Sachs Foundation this summer on 10,000 Women. Genevieve is interested in thinking about a career in Washington and maybe nonprofit service. And actually, what I tell her and so many women and men is that we live in a world now where you are rarely going to be in a position for 30 years or 20 years. You know, the way a previous generation of somebody might have worked at GE or Ford for a whole lifetime. You know, now you're really going to have different phases of your career. And the one thing that really stands out, even in this partnership, is that bringing the public and private and media together is always going to be critical. So having a chance to work in government for a period of time, to work in the private sector, to work in the public sector, gives you, I think, kind of a really well-rounded experience base for any role that you're going to have. I spent 15 years in government, and really was such an honor and a privilege. And now that I'm at Goldman Sachs, I have the chance to see kind of the flip side of how you execute with a little more efficiency. Sorry, Karen. You know, because
she agrees. Don't worry.
You've heard my bosses talk about, you know, measurement, results, budget. You know, there's no shutdown at Goldman Sachs. we have to, you know, really do the same strategic planning as the business units do. And I think that's what's differentiated 10,000 Women, and it's made us proud, is that we have actually tracked every single woman around the world that we work with and every small business owner, and really tried to prove the case, make the data set very clear that when women are economically empowered, not only does GDP grow and economies flourish, but all of society changes.
Now, Dina, I've been honored to go to a couple of the graduations for 10,000 women and 10,000 small businesses. And the great thing about these programs is you teach them metrics.
You're right, we do. We actually start by saying, if you don't measure it, you don't know it exists. And that is in every bit of your business. A lot of the women that we work with actually come in with, you know, a shoebox of receipts, and that's their financial planning model. And they, you know, obviously one of the great things we hope they get out of it. They take it, yes, that would be right. We can help you out, Michael. But actually, you know, and then they don't understand why it's difficult to get a loan. Well, you actually have to have a financial plan and a business plan, and if you're, you know, holding yourself accountable for the growth on that business plan, it makes a big difference.
And by the way, somebody's wearing Tory here. So Women Rule has talked a lot about political empowerment. Julie Katzman, one of your specialties is economic empowerment for women, and you talked to me about starting at the bottom of the pyramid. I was interested in that.
Right, so we are a development bank, that's the D in IDV, and we do a lot of work across the institution about women's economic empowerment. And largely the women who we're targeting are people who are amongst, I wouldn't say the poorest, but what we call the bottom of the pyramid, which is sort of the bottom billion. And that means focusing...
That's sobering to say it that way.
Yeah, right. And that means focusing on micro businesses and small businesses more than medium-sized enterprises, but also a little bit of medium. And I was saying earlier, and Dina was talking about metrics, one of the things that we find is there's a lack of information, right? So we play a role also in doing projects on the one hand to create information, but also looking at where are the information gaps, how do we fill them? So we launched a flagship product this year called the Women's Economic Empowerment Venture Scope with the Economist Intelligence Unit. And it looks at a broad base of countries in Latin America and says, what is the environment and whose environment is better? You know, rankings, so you guys know, have a lot of cachet and they motivate behavior, we have found. No one really wants to be last. So if you say, okay, we're going to look at women's economic empowerment in 20 countries on 5 dimensions, and we're going to do this ranking, and we're going to see what helps, what hurts, and how good you all are at doing this. And that's one of the things that we've done this year. We're looking at what makes those women who actually are succeeding and growing rapidly, what distinguishes them from women's businesses that don't. Things of that sort, so that we can then build on that information, whether it's with 10,000 women or other projects that we're doing.
So Karen Mills, to go from the bottom billion to the top 0.01%, you know a lot and have great relationships with business leaders. What would you like to see business leaders doing during this time when Washington is in so much chaos?
Well, we know that the American economy relies on its entrepreneurs in order to grow. And right now we're spending a lot of time talking about the deficit and tax, but we know actually to grow this economy, we need to create jobs. And who creates the jobs? Turns out in this country that entrepreneurs create the jobs. 2/3 of the job creation is done by small business. Main Street small business in this country is very important, but most of the net new jobs are created by a very small number of high growth businesses. And it turns out that the fastest growing startups in this country are women-owned businesses and Hispanic-owned businesses. They're just accelerating, but they can't get access to capital. They don't have the mentors and the networks. And at the Small Business Administration and in other public-private partnerships, we have really focused, and I focused for the last 5 years, on addressing those gaps in the market. So people are talking a lot now about what should government's role be, what should businesses' role be. Turns out public-private partnerships, like Goldman Sachs has started, are really essential pieces of getting our economy growing again. And it's not yes and no, it is together. And this set of formulas we call creating entrepreneurial ecosystems. They are particularly important for groups that don't have access and opportunity, but still have that entrepreneurial spirit. So we can create jobs, not just in Silicon Valley, but all across this country, and led by all of our talented entrepreneurs, including are women entrepreneurs.
Now, Natalia, one of the programs that the Pipeline Fellowship has is an angel investing boot camp for women. They come for 6 months and actually bring money with them and collectively invest. You were telling me that after working with those women, you realize that sometimes people have a preconception about what a woman CEO like Kim Kingsley or CEO is going to be like. Talk about those preconceptions.
Well, what is the face of a microfinance-backed entrepreneur? And what is the face of a VC/angel-backed entrepreneur? Let me spell it out. Woman of color, white guy. And that's really, as a queer Latina, I'm very passionate in making sure that we get more women of color and women and people of color on the investing side, because we have heard so much about how pattern recognition really is the way that people get funded. There was a very prominent
pattern recognition, tell me what that is.
I'm just about to say it. There's a very prominent tech investor a few years ago who was asked, well, what do you look for when you invest? And he was like, someone like me. And he most recently came into the news because he also acknowledged that he usually doesn't consider investing with people with accents, and so he came under a lot of flack for that. And that's exactly what pattern recognition is, investing in what's familiar and what we understand. And so often that means that for white guys who tend to be predominantly the ones with the purse strings in the VC world and also in the angel investing world, they tend to invest in other white guys. Just to give you some stats, in 2012, out of all the US angel investors, only 22% were women and only 5% were minorities. And I'll start up with like the optimistic turn of events, and then we can go back to the dreary event as well. In 2011, out of all the US angel investors, only 12% were women and only 4% were minorities. So, and this is where to provide some context, the Pipeline Fellowship, this angel investing bootcamp for women, we launched April 2011, so please keep that in mind. So in 1 year, we're talking about 12% going up to 22% in terms of women. Minority US angels investors, it still went up. It went from 4 to 5%. We still have a long way to go. And when I was talking about preconceptions, I very simply came about launching the Pipeline Fellowship because I'm a huge advocate for for-profit social ventures. And I'll be cheeky right now because there's a lot of conversation regarding public-private partnerships. And I grew up, actually, my father used to work for the UN. So growing up, I got to see a lot of these public-private partnerships firsthand. And I will say that one of the reasons that I love for-profit social ventures is exactly because it's almost a PPP unto itself. It has the efficiencies of the corporate world and it has the heart of the nonprofit world. And what I realized was that once again, entrepreneurs were ahead of the curve. They were coming up with these hybrid business models. And my take was we need to create more hybrid investors who get the value of the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profits.
Now, Dina, I think you were going to jump in and add a point about pattern recognition.
And also, I was, and a big part of it is how important mentoring is and how important having a role model for whether you're a businesswoman or a woman in leadership. It actually is always cited as the differentiating factor that gave someone the confidence to move forward. And I'll just kind of talk about a domestic example and international example. The Tory Burch Foundation. I mean, Tory, when she started her business, says now that the reason she wanted to start her incredible enterprise was so that she could build a foundation to support other female entrepreneurs. And she, might even say this later, but and how many investors would say to her, "Oh, you shouldn't say that. You shouldn't even say that." And she now says it with such pride, and it's made such an impact. We have a partnership with the Tory Burch Foundation through 10,000 Small Businesses, which works with female entrepreneurs that have already gotten seed funding from Tory's work and going through her foundation. And we now have a special curriculum for them. These are women who maybe have 1 year of a business, they're just beyond a startup, and they just don't have the confidence. They have the talent, they have the product, and they just can't believe that there are other women like them. I mean, obviously they look up to Tori as a hero for them, that just 9 years ago she built this global enterprise, which is extraordinary. And then they also have the peer-to-peer mentoring in the program. They see other women like them who are facing the same challenges, and they think, well, if she can do it, I can do it too. And what's really amazing about our partnership with the Tory Burch Foundation is that not only are we seeing exciting numbers in terms of revenue growth and job creation, but 75% of them are now doing business together. Not just referring business, but actually have created a marketplace together. And that's what happens when women really come together. And then I see Assistant Secretary of State Evan Ryan there. And I'm so thrilled that already one of her focuses is the promotion of female entrepreneurship around the world. In many ways, there's nothing more valuable that the United States could promote than women in business and women as agents of change.
Is it true that Evan Ryan is in your literal office?
They've upgraded the job when they put Evan into it. But yes, I had the privilege of serving there. And we were just today actually talking about many partnerships, including one Elisa Nelson runs, which is the Vital Voices program, the Fortune Mentoring program, which will be here next week. But this notion of mentoring is not just kind of a nice support network or being friendly with each other. It is actually attributing to the bottom line in terms of creating new markets.
Julie Katzman.
So I have two has seeded about 15 venture funds in Brazil. Most of them have become quite successful. So when I first took my job, I went to Brazil and I went to meet all these venture management companies. And by the fifth, sixth one, every time I got invested to the team, it was 100% male. So by the seventh one, I said, okay, are there any women? And he said, oh, of course. So the next thing I know, the person who's the secretary in the accounting department is being brought into the room. So, okay, look, you guys, we give you our money. We've got a lot of agendas. Big part of it is a social agenda. Go hire some women. I promise you that out of the business schools, they're really capable women and they want these jobs. So 12 months later, the guy who's the managing partner came to Washington and he said, okay, we hired 2 women. You were right. They're really good and they work so much harder than the men. I said, yeah, okay, this is not a surprise.
Hopefully
for the same pay, absolutely the same pay. And the second one is just about mentoring. We recently finished, and a part of this was with 10,000 Women, a project in Peru where we trained 100,000 female micro-entrepreneurs with sort of a small quantum of training, including some reinforcement from telenovelas that were on TV. And at the end of the day, what you find out is you feel, and we did this for this reason, we did a very big impact evaluation, control groups, what works. You feel great about all this training, but it's not really having much of an impact. The piece that has impact is the mentorship. And what we have to do now is put more money into mentorship and follow these women for a longer period of time to be able to show that, yes, it costs more, but the rate of return is really there. Mike, can I ask a question of this group? How many of you are entrepreneurs, have a business, want to have a business? How many of you have a mentor, advisor, counselor? Anyone? Well, I'll tell you, this is more hands than usually go up because usually the guys, they're like, no, I don't really admit that I have a mentor. But we have data that shows that if you have a mentor, an advisor that you meet with regularly, you have better sales, better profits, more longevity, and you hire more people. And there's a network out there, all kinds of networks out there, and the SBA has a network of about 12,000 SCORE and small business development centers that are free. So that is a really essential part, one of the sort of 3 essential parts for entrepreneurship: counseling, and a mentor, capital, and then sales, business opportunity.
So reporters always have an ear for a great quote, and behind the curtain backstage, Julie Katzman told me a great quote. And by the way, this is a good tweet if you're tweeting out there, #WomenRule. Julie Katzman told me what women are not. Tell me that.
That women are not a niche. So
it's a pretty good tweet, huh?
That's a good one.
And the context is, we do work with financial institutions, and they say, well,
it's a niche market for us. It's 50% of the population. So there's an organization called the Global Alliance on Banking for Women. I may have just gotten the Global Banking Alliance for Women. Sorry, GBA. And it's a global network of banks who are committed to growing their presence in the market for women in terms of both enterprises and individuals. And it's people who say, hey, this isn't a niche. We may need to serve that market differently to have the most impact, but it's certainly not a niche market. And that's a really important thing that we're trying to get financial institutions to understand.
Okay, we're going to go now to my colleague Lois Romano, who's helped make Women Rule possible, and I think she might have a question.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, ladies. And Mike, thank you for being our token dude.
It's an honor.
You all are talking about mentorship in one form or another, but you all are part of enterprises, institutions you've either created or joined. When I was a young reporter, there weren't that many women that wanted to help other women. We used to call it the queen bee syndrome. So what I'd like to know is, how can you encourage women to help other women if they're not part of a large organization?
That's a great question, Lois. I think actually it's forums like this, first of all. I think women are very inclined to help other women, but they don't have the access. They don't know how to find, whether it's women entrepreneurs or young women to mentor. So obviously the Tory Burch Foundation and this partnership with Google and Politico is a start. We've done a number of minute mentoring activities with Tory. But also, one of the things that I learned from Susan Molinari, actually, many years ago when she was a female congressman on the Hill and I was working there, is that it's really important that you think of yourself as a mentor early. Not that you're being mentored, but that you look back and say, gosh, even though I'm at this early stage in my career, I really could have an opportunity to make a difference if I reach out to someone. And so I think so many of us don't even realize that we have that opportunity.
The other part that I would say is I'm a huge believer that mentoring is a two-way street. So knock us on Twitter, you can also quote that. So I call it co-mentoring. So I call that co-mentoring. And just a few things. There was a study done in terms of how women, of course it's a gendered study, on how women mentor and how they network versus how men network. And what the study came up with was that men have this huge network, and they go to it for professional support and for personal support. And what turned out, according to the study, is that women have two networks, one for their professional support and one for their personal support. So they were missing out on a lot of opportunities because they weren't cross-pollinating. They weren't asking for personal support to their professional network, and they weren't asking regarding professional support from their personal network. Case in point, the storied, anecdote on two guys meeting, playing basketball, and then they actually end up with, brokering a business deal. Versus, and this is a true story, an acquaintance sharing with me that it wasn't until the 4th month of doing downward dog next to this woman that she realized that she was actually a potential investor. So I bring that up in terms of also being out of the box in terms of where you could find your potential investors or potential professional opportunities. It could be in that book club that you frequent. The other part that I would say, and is provocative from the other side of the table, and Whitney Johnson, she's Johnson Whitney on Twitter, she has an HBR blog, and she wrote in a post on how whenever she would meet a guy at an event, he would say, you should really meet Sally. And then, she would meet Sally, and they're like, I wonder why we were connected. And it was like, oh, it's because we're both women. So the other side of it is also, if we can integrate, the men that we know and challenge them to say, well, who do you know who would be a strategic person, whether it's a woman or a guy in your network who could help further my career, further my business, that would also help in terms of us increasing the influence that our network can have.
Okay, Natalia had some good practical ideas there, and we're going to stick in this practical realm for a minute. If I'm a young woman, say Genevieve Ryan, and I am going to the workforce, am starting a business, want to start a business, Karen Mills, what are some of the very practical day-to-day, person-to-person advice that you would give that young woman?
Right. The first piece of advice, and we touched on this earlier, is have a plan. Having a vision, having an idea is all fine, but you actually have to have a plan, which you turn into a business plan. So you have to think through what is it that you're trying to achieve. And it could be that you very much want to have a home business, you want to have a part-time business, you want to turn a hobby into a business. It could be that you have a vision of building something quite large. Depending on your plan, then you reverse engineer success. You say, if I want to be $10 million in 3 years, what do I have to do to get there? How much money do I have to develop this product? How many people do I have to have? And that will bring you to understand whether you should seek out angel financing, whether you should seek out venture financing, whether you could self-finance it, you know, with your $2,000 of savings. And those courses are very different. So the first thing to do is to have a plan. And once again, I'll repeat, if you have trouble getting that plan, there's a whole network of people out there, score counselors and advisors and mentors who will help you write that plan. And there's a template on the SBA website. And I think, why try to reinvent the wheel?
Talk a little bit about that. Is that the Give Me Five? Is that part of the Give Me Five program?
So Give Me Five is another program. Many people, especially in the Washington area, make their living most days, not today, working with the government. One of the great sad things about the government shutdown is that the hundreds of thousands of small businesses that serve the government are also shut down. And that whole supply chain is really going to have a terrible negative impact. But one thing we have in this country that actually is the envy of many other countries is that we have a rule that says 5%, give me 5, of all of this contracting is going to go to women. And each point of contracting is about $5 billion a year. So we're talking about mobilizing $25 billion of contracts into the hands of women. We're at 4%, we need to be at 5%. But once again, that's not 1 point, that's $5 billion. So how do we get more women into this contracting flow? If you are a woman in this area, you have a skill or expertise, you want to go, once again, on the SBA website, you want to become a GSA contractor, and you want to self-register in the SBA program for women-owned businesses as a woman-owned business, and that can give you preference and set-asides on contracts. And that gives you sales and revenue, which is the oxygen you need.
Okay, to stay very practical for a second, Natalia, at the Pipeline Fellowship, one of the skills that you teach is pitching. What are your top tips on pitching?
Yes, so let's start with pet peeves. I judge a lot of pitch events, and one of the ones that I see is, no one has thought of this. I'm first. I'm the first to market. And I actually find much more compelling pitches that say, this is the market landscape. These are 8 potential competitors, and this is how my product or service differentiates itself. So being very specific, it shows that you have done your research. It shows that you have a plan. It shows that you understand how you're adding value to the market and how you're meeting a pain point. The other one I'd say, interestingly enough, is that pitching is, I'll say what I think and then I'll share a quotation. Pitching is storytelling, and it's knowing that narrative and knowing how to be compelling about it. Dana Goldstein, she was one of the first entrepreneur who secured funding from our angels in training. Once they graduate, they become angel investors. And what she likes to say is that pitching is simply the start of a conversation. So if you can think about it that way, it really normalizes it and makes it a much more comfortable event. Here are some stats for you. So we know from the blogosphere that women and people of color entrepreneurs are not getting funded. Guess what? Women and people of color entrepreneurs are not pitching either. And so just to give you some stats from 2012, out of all the startups that were pitching to US angel investors, only 16% of them were women-led. And from that 16%, 25% secured funding. Out of all the startups that were pitching to US angels in 2012, only 6% were minority-led, and from that 6%, 18% secured funding. So of course, there are reasons such as people not realizing that they have a scalable business that could be able to secure funding, because that's the other thing. If you don't have a scalable business, then angel investing, VC type of capital is not for you. The other part of it is that they might not be invited into the room. That's the other part. The third part, which I'm much more keenly interested in because it's about us, is we just might not be pitching because we don't think we're ready. And so that's why this is, once again, quotable, nakis nakis, women rule. I'm on, like, as a queer Latina, I have several agendas, and this one is pitching isn't a zero-sum game. So I'll repeat it again. Pitching isn't a zero-sum game. And the reason I'm saying that is because I meet a lot of entrepreneurs who are like, I don't know, I'm not ready. I don't think I'll win if I pitch today. And my whole take is that even if you don't secure the funding from pitching that day, by sharing your idea, by sharing your company, those potential investors might know someone who might be interested in your company and might be interested in investing. And also, they might provide key critical feedback to get your business to a place that can better fulfill market needs.
I think Lois Romano has another audience question for us.
Actually, I was going to turn to the audience. Does anybody here, would they like to ask a question of this fabulous group of women?
And
come on.
While somebody's looking, and just grab the microphone, I'm going to ask Julie Katzman. You're on a couple boards, including the International Center for Research on Women and the MacArthur Foundation awards the Genius Grant. What advice do you give women to push beyond some of the constraints that they might have, either if women are risk averse or because they're too cautious? How do they overcome those?
So, you know, we have a really interesting conversation going on inside our own organization about that question. Because people say women are risk averse, but we're not really convinced. You know, it is true that in our part of the world and in many parts of the world, women end up having to borrow more to start their businesses because they don't have the same level of savings. Okay, so then that's a rational thing. If I'm levered at the very start of my business, I should make sure that I can pay my debts, right? And then maybe when I've paid that down, it has affected the way I think about how to grow my business because I just got out of debt. Now do I want to go back into debt? But am I naturally more risk averse? Really not clear. So I want to say that because I think that women are maybe getting a bad rap on this whole risk thing. But, you know, overall, I think if you put it in the introduction, you talked about a couple of boards. You know, there's been a big conversation about why is it that there are still sort of 20% of women or less who are on large company boards throughout the world, other than in those places that have put in place legislation requiring more women on boards. And again, I don't think that has a thing to do with not leaning in or with risk aversion. It has to do with what do people who run those companies see as normal. And they got 20% of women on their boards, and they think that's just fine.
I'm about to get the hook from Beth here. So for the Grand Slam cleanup question, either from Lois or someone with a microphone.
Someone back here had a question. So, Laura?
Hi, I have a question.
You get the last word.
Sure. Hi, Laura McGann. My question is, I feel like being in this room, there's sort of a lot of themes that I've seen coming together about women and entrepreneurship and investing in other women. And I'm wondering if you see something parallel happening on the political front as women become more involved in starting companies or investing in other women's companies. Are we seeing the same thing happen politically? Are women becoming more politically active in terms of donating to women candidates? And if not, should that be a part of our discussion?
Dina Powell.
Well, I think you're right to say, gosh, we're starting to hear these themes. Women are a good investment, supporting women, you know, yields to economic growth. But that only really has happened in recent years. And it was when data emerged, data that the IDB had in the global context, data that we had, our economists wrote, Womenomics and Women Hold Up Half the Sky, that actually showed that when women are a greater part of the labor force in emerging economies, global GDP grows. And so while there's been, you know, many years of people people advocating for women in different sectors until you have data that it shows it really makes a difference, and it's not the right thing to do. It's just smart economics. I think that's when you started to feel that the debate was really changing, and everybody was almost just saying, well, of course that makes sense. Of course half of society participating leads to more productive growth. And I think that's what's got to happen here, too. You know, when we begin to actually show data that it really makes a difference when you have a woman in the room, when consensus builds more quickly. You know, even in the context of 10,000 women, it really, now in our 5th year, we're realizing that many of the women start off as a tiny entrepreneur, maybe in Lagos, Nigeria, or Kigali, Rwanda, or Cairo, Egypt, and obviously through the business training, they grow their business, they emerge as a business leader, but the biggest takeaway for them is confidence, and suddenly they're becoming political leaders now.
Karen Mills, 10 seconds.
So in America,
no pressure.
We want to create jobs. And what I saw traveling all around this country is mayors and community developers. More and more of them are women, and they are integrating all of the activity on that regional level. It turns out that's the key to creating these entrepreneurial ecosystems, which create vibrant communities out of Pittsburgh and Minnesota. And I think women are emerging politically because they're driving economic growth at this area. Then they run for mayor, then they can be governor. So we are seeing a really good confluence of things. Women involved in communities and economic growth, creating a lot of jobs, getting political credibility, coming to the next level, bringing with them those economic strategies. I'm very hopeful for those pieces.
And so one quick statistic from Emily's list. Apparently it takes up to 6 times to ask for a woman to run for office before she will consider it, versus like not asking at all for guys. And I wanted to make the connection on how, in terms of, I don't have enough fingers on my hands to tell you how many guys I know who are like, I'm an angel investor. I put $2K down in my buddy's startup. And there was a woman who heard me speak at a conference. She made a beeline for me and she was like, I need to go through your boot camp. And it turned out that she had invested $75,000 in a company the year before, and she didn't consider herself an angel investor. So a lot of it is owning it. And the fact is that funding is not meritocratic. We talked about boards, and someone, of course, I got into the Twitter fray, and my whole take was, if actually it were meritocratic, there would be more boards with women and people of color. And I'll leave you with one resource suggestion, which is Nilofer Merchant. She wrote a very interesting op-ed on the whole Twitter fiasco on Time, and she can be found on Twitter at Nilofer.
As we say goodbye, I wanted to note that Beth Brooke of EY, who was going to be with us, was attending to urgent personal matters. She sent me a note. She said that she sends her best and says that women rule. I want to thank all of you out in live stream land. Thank you for the Twitter question.
Thank our designated dude. Also.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
It was for diversity.
This was a treat. Thank you in the audience. We thank Google and the Tory Burch Foundation for making this amazing program possible. Our Politico colleagues, the events team of Beth Lester Sadu, Lois Romano, everybody who works so hard on it. And we thank our panelists for a great conversation. Have a great day.